The title of this lecture segment, The Feminization of Clergy in America, is the title of a very important study by a sociologist of religion and an Episcopal priest named Paula Nesbitt, who taught for several years at the Iliff School of Theology in the late 90s, early 2000s. She's now professor in Berkeley, and she's also an adjunct on the faculty of the Church Divinity School of the Pacific. Paula, as I said, is an Episcopal priest. She was trained in sociology at Harvard and has written tremendously important works about the changing face of clergy in America, and particularly in the Episcopal Church. And what Nesbitt notes in her book is that in the 1980s and early 1990s, more women entered into seminary in America to prepare for careers in the ordained ministry. And that rising number of women entering into seminary coincided with a decreasing number of vocations among men entering into seminary at exactly the same time. And so, of course, in her work, she talks about this chapter in the history of the Episcopal Church with the decision in 1976 to admit women to priestly orders, but she also talks about the ordination of women in the Unitarian Church and in other denominations. And so you would expect, with this declining numbers of men entering into seminary study and the rising number of women, that there would be a transformation on the face of American Christianity and the role of women in church leadership positions. What she also noticed then was the fact that the women who were entering into seminary in the 80s and in the 90s was that these women tended to be older. They entered seminary in their 40s and in their 50s, often as second career vocations, and women who had raised families, who were participating in that empty nest syndrome, but had the freedom to enter into theological education. But what she found, interestingly enough, is that as these women completed seminary and were ordained and entered into the work of parish churches, that they often found themselves in assistant positions, in associate positions, in positions of Christian education, in positions of youth work, in positions of pastoral care, in positions of chaplaincy, but that these women, unlike their male counterparts in previous generations, or even unlike their contemporaries, were not moving up the traditional ranks of clergy roles so that they were ordained or they were appointed as rectors, as being people in leadership roles in parishes. And because they were not being appointed rectors, they also weren't being elected as bishops in the Episcopal Church. So that now, as we stand 40 years beyond the ordination of the Philadelphia 11. And we look around us. We look around our various dioceses. And this week I invite you to do that, to think about your diocese, to think about the parishes of your diocese, to think about the women who are rectors in your diocese, to think about the women who are rectors in your diocese, or who chair the standing committee, or the commission on ministry, or the board of examining chaplain. When you think about those clergy roles in your diocese, you begin to recognize that in the 40 years since the ordination of the Philadelphia 11, we have found in the Episcopal Church that the glass ceiling is very thick, and that a lot of women have bashed their heads on it, and that we are in a place where we have to ask why it is that women are not being found in the leadership roles that we might expect. It's interesting that only recently has the average age of persons entering seminary, both women and men, come back down toward the more traditional age. The average age of people entering seminary now is 26 to 28. But if you'll recall, when I entered seminary, when my good friend George entered seminary, when most of my friends who are now my men friends who are now Episcopal priests entered seminary, they entered seminary when they were 21 years old. They were ordained priests when they were 24 or 25 years old. They've been in ministry a long time. Those are things we have to keep in mind as we talk about some of these issues this week. It's a very interesting demographic, don't you think?